Flat Earth Proof 1. The Level. It is the natural physics of water to find and maintain a level surface. So then, all bodies of water should conform to the curvature of the earth. That is, if the earth is indeed a ball. Any body of water conforming to the curvature would therefore exhibit a distinctive bulge in its center. For instance, a lake 6 miles across would form a measurable mound of water in its center 6 feet high. Next time you're at a lake or at the ocean, keep an eye out for this obviously unobservable fact. Further confirming the non-curvature of the water's surface is the reflection of the moon in water. If the earth were a ball and the moon in front of you, her reflection would be off the side of the curved water facing away from you, and therefore you wouldn't even see the lunar reflection. You would only see the moon's reflection if she were directly above or behind you, and it would appear as a spotlight on the water. Only on a flat plane does the reflecting light form in a straight line from horizon to observer. The surface of water is but one issue. Based on the claim that Earth is a spinning ball hurtling through space at such immense speeds, factoring in the many wobbles caused by asteroids, comets, and the like, such obviously consistently level surfaces should not even exist. So, leaving the water's surface aside, did you know that it is a fundamental fact that surveyors, engineers, and architects never factor in the supposed curvature of the Earth into their projects? Canals, railroads, tunnels, and bridges are all cut and laid horizontally, never allowing for any curvature, often over hundreds of kilometers. One surveyor of 30 years published in the Birmingham Weekly Mercury, "All our locomotives are designed to run on what may be regarded as true levels or flats. There are, of course, partial inclines or gradients here and there, but they are always accurately defined and must be carefully traversed. But anything approaching to 8 inches in the mile, increasing as the square of the distance, could not be worked by any engine that was ever yet constructed." He goes on to say, horizontal curves on levels are dangerous enough. Vertical curves would be 1,000 times worse, and with our rolling stock constructed as at present, physically impossible. As stated by the Manchester Ship Canal Company in Earth Review, it is customary in railway and canal constructions for all levels to be referred to a datum which is nominally horizontal and is so shown on all sections. It is not the practice in laying out public works to make allowances for the curvature of the earth. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions. Okay, here we are at Lake Minnewanka in Alberta, and as you can see, we're just less than a foot above the water surface here. And if we zoom in across the lake, the coastline across the lake clearly comes into focus. So you can see that the water clearly has no curvature, and the water surface is completely flat. So there you have it, folks. More conclusive proof. Here I am, not even a foot off the surface of the edge of the water. And we can zoom across here completely and see absolutely no curvature. Flat Earth Proof 2. Pilot Principles. The Earth, set to spin eastward at a speed of 1,600 kilometers per hour at the equator. So then, how is a plane able to fly eastward at half that speed and reach its destination in more or less the same time as the return flight, when in fact the plane should never reach its eastward destination before it comes rushing up from behind it? And how is it even remotely possible to safely land an aircraft on a runway moving at such a speed? I shouldn't have to mention that it would be disastrously impossible. We can discuss rotational speeds all day, while some claim that Earth's atmosphere is velcroed tightly to Earth's surface by gravity, despite no protection from the infinite vacuum supposedly surrounding it. But the one fact against the ball Earth model is that for the average commercial flight flying at 800 kilometers per hour, pilots would have to course correct at a descending rate of 850 meters per minute in order to follow the curvature of the Earth. Failure to do so would result in a 50,000 meter gain in altitude in just the first hour. In reality, once a plane reaches cruising altitude, all controls level out and are maintained level until descent for landing. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions. Flat Earth Proof 3. Land Ho. In this episode, I will be presenting just some documented examples of the many places visible on Earth across distances which should in fact be impossible, considering the curvature of the ball Earth model, 25,000 miles in circumference. I must give credit to Eric Dubé for his work in this matter, as all these examples are taken from his book, 200 Proofs Earth is Not a Spinning Ball. If you haven't already come across his work, I urge you to look into it. So without any further ado, sit back, relax, and let's get started. The Dunkirk Light in southern France at 194 feet is visible from a boat approximately 10 feet above sea level from 28 miles away. At this distance on the ball Earth, the light should be hidden behind 190 feet of curvature. The light at Cape Bonavista, Newfoundland is 150 feet above sea level and visible from 35 miles, where it should be below 490 feet of curvature. The lighthouse steeple of St. Botolph's Parish Church in Boston is 290 feet tall and visible from over 40 miles, where it should be hidden below a full 800 feet of curvature. The Isle of Wight Lighthouse in England is 180 feet high and can be seen up to 42 miles away, where it should be below 996 feet of curvature. The Cape Lagulias Lighthouse in South Africa is 33 feet high, 238 feet above sea level, and can be seen for over 50 miles, where it should be below 1,400 feet of curvature. The Statue of Liberty in New York stands 326 feet above sea level, and on a clear day can be seen as far as from 60 miles away. At that distance on the ball Earth, Lady Liberty would be an impossible 2,074 feet below the curvature. The lighthouse at Port Said in Egypt, at an elevation of only 60 feet, has been seen an astonishing 58 miles away, where it should be below 2,182 feet of curvature. Some other examples include the base of the Isle of Wight, where water and land meet, forming a perfectly straight line 22 statute miles long. On the ball Earth, the Isle of Wight should decline 80 feet from the center on each side to conform to the curvature. However, the crosshairs of good theodolites have repeatedly shown the waterline to be perfectly level, and on a clear day from the highland near Douglas Harbour on the Isle of Man, the whole length of the coast of North Wales is often plainly visible to the naked eye. The 50-mile stretch has also repeatedly been found to be horizontal. On the ball Earth, however, the 50-mile Welsh coast would decline from the center a stark 416 feet on either side. In regards to distances over land, the Philadelphia skyline is clearly visible from Apple Pie Hill in New Jersey 40 miles away. Factoring in the 205-foot elevation of Apple Pie Hill, the Philadelphia skyline should be well hidden behind 335 feet of curvature. The New York City skyline is clearly visible from Bear Mountain 60 miles away. Despite factoring in the 1,283-foot summit of Bear Mountain, the New York City skyline should still remain invisible behind 170 feet of curvature. The Chicago skyline can often be seen from sea level 60 miles away from across Lake Michigan. When Joshua Nowitzki photographed this phenomenon, several news channels quickly claimed his picture was of a superior mirage. Although these do occur, the mirage will always appear upside down and somewhat hazy. Despite the photograph showing otherwise, their model insists that the Chicago skyline hides behind 2,400 feet of curvature. From Anchorage, Alaska, on a clear day, at an elevation of 102 feet, Mount Foraker can be seen by the naked eye. At 120 miles away, the summit should be leaning away from the observer and hidden by 7,719 feet of ball earth, when in reality the entire mountain, from base to summit, can be seen standing upright. Another example from Anchorage, Alaska, is Mount McKinley. At 130 miles away on the ball earth, the 20,320-foot summit should be leaning away from the observer and almost half covered by 9,220 feet of curved earth. But just like Mount Foraker, Mount McKinley is always seen standing straight up and visible from base to summit. From Genoa, Italy, at a height of just 70 feet above sea level, the island of Gorgona can often be seen at 81 miles away. On the ball earth, however, Gorgona should be hidden behind 3,332 feet of curvature. Also from Genoa, the island of Corsica can often be seen at 99 miles away. On the ball earth, Corsica should be hidden behind 5,245 feet, almost a mile of curvature. A third instance from Genoa is the island of Capraia. At 102 miles away, on the ball earth, Capraia should be hidden behind 5,605 feet. That's over a mile of curvature. And lastly, if you stuck around this long, a fourth and final example from Genoa is the island of Elba, seen from an incredible 125 miles away. At that distance, on the ball earth, Elba should be forever invisible behind 8,770 feet of water, which is well over a mile of supposed curvature. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions. Flat Earth Proof 4: The Horizon. No matter where you go in our vast Earth, the horizon will always appear as a perfectly level line, 360 degrees all around you. This is true regardless of altitude. In fact, as you gain altitude, the horizon appears to maintain its height at eye level, despite the ground receding beneath you into the distance. If Earth were in fact a ball, then as you rose up, the horizon would appear to descend beneath you, appearing as a circle, getting smaller progressively as you rose up. But in reality, the horizon is always at eye level, no matter how high you go, which really only indicates one thing: an outstretched plane. The Earth is flat, and we've been had. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions. intended, as more and more precise instruments have failed to measure any stellar parallax. But that's a matter for a whole other episode. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions. Flat Earth Proof 6: Polar Climates. If Earth were a globe, then it should follow that both the Arctic and Antarctic regions would share similar conditions and characteristics, such as comparative temperatures, seasons, length of daylight, etc. But in reality, the two regions are almost as different as night and day. To begin, let's address the prime influence on climate: the sun. While on a ball Earth, you'd expect the sun to behave very similar at both poles. In our investigation, we find this is clearly not the case. For instance, the longest days in the north are much longer than those in the south. Dawn and dusk also occur differently in these two regions, with twilight coming and lasting much longer in the north, sometimes for over an hour, compared to similar southern latitudes, where twilight always comes and goes quickly, sometimes in a matter of minutes. This is exactly what is to be expected from a flat plane, with the sun circling above and around the central pole in 24-hour cycles, traveling steadily between the tropics every 6 months. Sticking to the sun, another contrasting point between the northern and southern regions is the midnight sun, a distinctly Arctic phenomenon occurring every year during the summer solstice, where, for several days, any observer significantly far north can watch the sun travel in circles overhead, not setting for upwards of 72 hours. Meanwhile, in Antarctica, corresponding with the Arctic midnight sun, the Royal Belgian Geographical Society notes that from May 17th to July 21st, the sun doesn't even rise above the Antarctic horizon. This is, of course, because during those days, the sun is at his innermost cycle, revolving tightly above and around the northern center. Though scientists will claim that the midnight sun is also an Antarctic experience, there are no uncut videos demonstrating this, nor are any independent explorers allowed into Antarctica to either verify or refute this claim. But that issue's a whole other can of worms. Further demonstrating that the central northern regions receive a more benevolent climate than their southern counterparts would be the example of Iceland. At 65 degrees north latitude, Iceland thrives with 870 native plant species and abundant animal life. Compare this to Georgia Island, which, despite being a whole 11 degrees closer to the equator than Iceland, at 54 degrees south latitude, is nearly devoid of any ecoculture, having only a measly 18 native plant species and virtually no animal life. In fact, Captain James Cook lamented that he was unable to find there a single shrub large enough to make a toothpick. But to crown it all off, despite the Arctic regions enjoying moderately warm summers and manageable winters, where the average annual temperature is minus 15 degrees Celsius, Antarctica is by far the coldest place on Earth, with an average annual temperature of minus 50 degrees Celsius, where it never even warms enough to melt the perpetual ice and snow, and it also holds the all-time lowest temperature ever to be recorded on Earth of minus 93.2 degrees Celsius. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions. Flat Earth Proof 7: Down South. All other proofs aside, the differences between the globe and the flat Earth become apparent when considering distances south of the equator. After all, haven't navigators, geographers, and map makers mapped these areas? And shouldn't they have noticed this quirk by now, if the Earth is indeed flat? Well, the reality is, the rabbit hole just gets deeper from here. So, to begin, the distance between Sydney, Australia and Nelson, New Zealand, on the ball Earth, given their coordinates and sparing you the spherical trigonometry,
should be 1,310 miles, but the Australian Handbook, Almanac Shippers and Importers Directory states the measured distance as being 1,550 miles, which is a full 18% longer. And while on the ball Earth model, Antarctica is said to be a continent of ice situated at the bottom of the ball from 78 degrees south latitude, it should therefore not have a perimeter greater than 12,000 miles. However, early explorers like Captain Cook and James Clark Ross, in attempting to circumnavigate Antarctica, took 3 to 4 years to do so, and clocked in the distance traveled at 50 to 60,000 miles. That's twice the circumference of the equator. But the real proof for the flat Earth map is in the flight paths. On the ball Earth, several flights would have their shortest, quickest, and straightest path over or around the Antarctic continent. But instead, these flights take all manner of tangential detours, crossing into the northern hemisphere to refuel. Their reason? Antarctica's too cold, they claim. Well, I'm not buying it. When they claim there are bases with working machinery set up all over Antarctica. So let's just take a look at the actual flight paths and see what they have to disclose. One flight that should be a simple 11-hour shot across the Indian Ocean is from Johannesburg, South Africa to Perth, Australia. However, this flight takes a detour north, stopping in either Dubai, Hong Kong, or Malaysia to refuel, for a total flight time averaging over 18 hours. This ridiculously wayward detour is frustrating to say the least, but on the flat Earth map starts to make sense. Another quick and easy flight, you would think, is from Johannesburg to Santiago, Chile. While an easy 12-hour flight below the Tropic of Capricorn is to be expected, instead every flight crosses the equator to refuel in Senegal, all the way near the Tropic of Cancer, for a total flight time of 19 hours. Though it doesn't make sense on the globe, as you can see it fits perfectly on the flat Earth map. A third flight from Johannesburg is to São Paulo, Brazil, which should be a direct 10-hour flight across the 25th degree south latitude. But instead, every flight crosses into the north to stop in London to refuel, making the total flight time 24 hours. From Santiago, Chile to Sydney, Australia, a straight 15-hour flight across the South Pacific is expected. Despite refueling options in either New Zealand or any island in the South Pacific, the flight stops all the way at Los Angeles to refuel before continuing south to its destination. As already stated, these detours make no sense on the globe, but are explained and work perfectly well on the flat Earth map, having the North Pole at the center. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions. Flat Earth Proof 7. Down South. All other proofs aside, the differences between the globe and the flat Earth become apparent when considering distances south of the equator. After all, haven't navigators, geographers, and map makers mapped these areas? And shouldn't they have noticed this quirk by now, if the Earth is indeed flat? Well, the reality is, the rabbit hole just gets deeper from here. So, to begin, the distance between Sydney, Australia and Nelson, New Zealand, on the ball Earth, given their coordinates and sparing you the spherical trigonometry, should be 1,310 miles. But the Australian Handbook, Almanac Shippers and Importers Directory states the measured distance as being 1,550 miles, which is a full 18% longer. And while on the ball Earth model, Antarctica is said to be a continent of ice situated at the bottom of the ball from 78 degrees south latitude, it should therefore not have a perimeter greater than 12,000 miles. However, early explorers like Captain Cook and James Clark Ross, in attempting to circumnavigate Antarctica, took 3 to 4 years to do so, and clocked in the distance traveled at 50 to 60,000 miles. That's twice the circumference of the equator. But the real proof for the flat Earth map is in the flight paths. On the ball Earth, several flights would have their shortest, quickest, and straightest path over or around the Antarctic continent. But instead, these flights take all manner of tangential detours, crossing into the northern hemisphere to refuel. Their reason? Antarctica's too cold, they claim. Well, I'm not buying it. When they claim there are bases with working machinery set up all over Antarctica. So let's just take a look at the actual flight paths and see what they have to disclose. One flight that should be a simple 11-hour shot across the Indian Ocean is from Johannesburg, South Africa to Perth, Australia. However, this flight takes a detour north, stopping in either Dubai, Hong Kong, or Malaysia to refuel, for a total flight time averaging over 18 hours. This ridiculously wayward detour is frustrating to say the least, but on the flat Earth map starts to make sense. Another quick and easy flight, you would think, is from Johannesburg to Santiago, Chile. While an easy 12-hour flight below the Tropic of Capricorn is to be expected, instead every flight crosses the equator to refuel in Senegal, all the way near the Tropic of Cancer, for a total flight time of 19 hours. Though it doesn't make sense on the globe, as you can see it fits perfectly on the flat Earth map. A third flight from Johannesburg is to São Paulo, Brazil, which should be a direct 10-hour flight across the 25th degree south latitude. But instead, every flight crosses into the north to stop in London to refuel, making the total flight time 24 hours. From Santiago, Chile to Sydney, Australia, a straight 15-hour flight across the South Pacific is expected, despite refueling options in either New Zealand or any island in the South Pacific. The flight stops all the way at Los Angeles to refuel before continuing south to its destination. As already stated, these detours make no sense on the globe, but are explained and work perfectly well on the flat Earth map, having the North Pole at the center. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions.
Flat Earth Proof 9. The Authorities. The year is 1954, and Admiral Richard Byrd has just returned from his latest Antarctic expedition. Enthusiastically, he speaks of an unexplored land, quote, beyond the South Pole, as big as the United States. Calling it the future of the nation, he further touts it as being the most valuable and important place in the world for science, an untouched reservoir of untapped resources, including coal, oil, minerals, and uranium. Now, remember that these are the 1950s, and there are no environmental groups to argue sustainability. The world is the businessman's oyster, and the future is looking very promising. But here's where the twist comes in, because following Admiral Byrd's next mission to Antarctica, after supposedly returning to the United States, nothing happens. No further missions, no talk of any further exploration, nothing. And then a meeting was held between the nations eagerly awaiting to slice Antarctica up like apple pie, with all signatories agreeing to no colonization of Antarctica. In 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was enacted, barring any independent exploration of Antarctica by the public, with no revisions until the year 2041. Although independent explorers such as Jarl Anderhoy have attempted independent access to Antarctica, as they've approached the southern latitudes, they've been met by armed ships threatening to open fire on them if they didn't turn around and go back. There are only 3 entry points to Antarctica sanctioned by the Antarctic Treaty, through which civilians may enter and tour Antarctica, but only under the supervision of pre-planned tours. To date, over 50 nations have signed on to the Antarctic Treaty, which to this day remains unbreached. Now, has any other treaty between industrialized nations lasted so long? Furthermore, as rocket science was also a quickly expanding field at the time, it only followed that the authorities seized control over the aeronautic industry before private enterprises were able to venture high enough and disclose the globe deception. With the establishment of NASA, the space program was militarized, and all the best and brightest scientists and engineers were then recruited and compartmentalized by this government agency. The lunar missions were aptly named after Apollo, as their prime purpose was to reinforce the heliocentric paradigm, in that both the Earth and the Moon are orbs orbiting the Sun. In reality, the rocket launches are merely a spectacle, with all launches curving off and falling back to Earth, out of view, and the images they've fed us faked, composited, or downright computer-generated. But the authorities have in fact known what the real map looks like, and they've managed to keep most navigators, astronomers, and the populace unaware behind the globe and celestial sphere, not to mention Mercator's projection. But the United States Geological Survey, or USGS for short, the prime atlas and map makers of the world, have been using a completely different map, the azimuthal equidistant projection, which was developed and proposed 1,000 years ago by Abu Rayhan Biruni, a Persian scholar who believed the Earth was flat. But hey, the authorities that shouldn't be love hiding their secrets in plain sight. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions.
Sun in orbit. The paths of the Sun and Moon above the flat disk Earth, as well as lunar phases, were encoded in the Chinese yin-yang symbol. The ancient Mesopotamians also believed in a flat disk Earth, which the surviving Babylonian account describes as having been formed from half the slain body of Tiamat, the primordial chaos, with the other half of her body being stretched out to form the skies and the netherworld, where all souls went to await after death. Situated above the pole star was the throne of the gods, and whilst the entire earth was surrounded by a salt ocean, a ridge of high mountains encircling the edge kept the waters from overflowing. Following Abraham out of Mesopotamia, all Abrahamic religions follow in describing the world as being fashioned in 6 days of evening and morning, and being fixed and immovable. The Hebrew cosmology describes the sun and moon as being set in the sky, and beneath the earth was the realm of Sheol, where deceased souls await in silence. Here are just some selections in regard to the nature of the cosmos, translated directly from the Hebrew texts. He encircles a boundary upon the face of the waters, unto the end of light and darkness. Who founded the earth upon her foundations, she shall not totter forever and ever. It is he who sits upon the circle of the earth, who stretches out the skies like a curtain, and spreads it out like a tent to dwell in. Is not God in the height of the heaven? And see the head of stars, how high is he? In addition, the first creation account of Genesis describes Elohim as fashioning the firmament, the Hebrew word rakira, implying the hammering of metal into a sheet, denoting a solid sky shield. Further accounts in the Hebrew canon describe the sun as stopping in the sky for about the length of a day, and even retrograding by 10 degrees on a sundial. The Arabic revelation describes a similar cosmology. And he has cast in the earth firm mountains, lest it shake with you, and rivers and roads, so that you may be guided. Have we not made the earth a resting place, and the mountains as pegs? Who created 7 heavens in layers, you don't see in the creation of the Most Merciful any fault. So return your vision. Can you see any flaw? Then return your vision a second time. Your vision will return to you humbled when fatigued. And it is he who created the night and the day, and the sun and the moon, all in orbit, are swimming. I was only able to cover a handful of these ancient world descriptions in this episode, but it must be noted that nearly all of these beliefs, with the exceptions of those absorbed and bastardized by the Church of Rome, have been hunted down and suppressed worldwide, with the surviving of these descriptions written off by their own institutions as either figurative or ancient ignorance. While the colonialists and missionaries of the European empires were of course all formally dispatched by their respective monarchs, they were all under the thumb of the brotherhoods operating from beneath the Vatican. In reality, there is only this one empire in the world today. Of course, they began by clearing out the Library of Egypt and burning down the building. In Scandinavia, natives who didn't renounce their beliefs in exchange for the cross of Christianity were shackled to rocks in bays and left to drown as the tides slowly ebbed in. Once the British established their standards in India, holy men, Ayurvedic doctors, and even just ordinary people who refused to wage work were rounded up and put in the very first insane asylums. The Chinese were so well versed in the knowledge of the earth and spirituality that it took the Jesuit spies years of scheming in order to devise plans that would ultimately displace traditional Chinese philosophy with Western science and ultimately communism, not to mention having pushed opium on the people for decades. Now, the first person credited as describing the ball earth in orbit around the sun was Pythagoras of Samos, to whose school Freemasonry traces their origins, and whose idea wasn't even able to convince the populace until it curiously resurfaced 2,000 years later, shortly after the supposed discovery of the New World, when the Vatican vehemently began to displace original cultures worldwide. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions.
Flat Earth Proof 11. Outer Space. The Earth. Wait for it. Wait for it. It's supposedly here. An insignificantly tiny speck, they say, somewhere in this vast vacuum. Ah, yes, the infinite vacuum of space, said to be in direct contact with the atmosphere of Earth. Yes, but the atmosphere is, of course, gas and should expand indefinitely to fill its container. But since the container of Earth's atmosphere is the entire area of space, then it should follow the second law of thermodynamics and establish equilibrium, as is the case in every single experiment ever conducted. In other words, after the alleged 4.5 billion years of Earth speeding around the Sun at over 100,000 kilometers per hour, the atmosphere should have long since dissipated by now. But there's gravity, people argue, maintaining the atmosphere perfectly. Right, whilst, of course, allowing simultaneous cross-directional winds to blow, insects to hover, birds to take off and fly, smoke to rise, not to mention helium-filled balloons, etc., etc., notwithstanding that it has never been shown that any object will attract matter to it due to its mass alone. So, let's just turn to investigate the vehicles of space and ask, can rockets work in a vacuum? A logically necessary question. Well, to answer, rockets require matter to push against in order to move forward. And according to repeatable experiments, rockets simply spin violently out of control when placed to function in a vacuum. Now, consider during Apollo 17 how the astronauts were able to capture the blue marble image at only 1/10 of the distance to the moon. This is akin to taking a picture of the runway from an airplane shortly after takeoff. This fact alone raises suspicions, but becomes even more apparent when one realizes that NASA only releases rear-facing footage from their rockets, and never forward-facing footage. But NASA admitting to the threat of drowning in space is the loudest testimony against their charade, with bubbles being caught rising on spacewalk footage, supposedly being carried out in the vacuum of space. Really? What substance is lighter than a vacuum so that it can rise in it? So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions.
Been transferred to a thermometer, going so far as to say it actually feels cold in the thermosphere. Okay. Don't ask me how they were able to then measure the 2000 degrees Celsius in the first place. But then you ask me, how is the International Space Station electrically grounded? And you've stumped me. So we ask NASA, and their response is that the ISS is grounded by the very air surrounding it. Wait, you mean to tell me that air that's so sparse it won't even register the intense temperature of 2000 degrees Celsius onto a thermometer is able to maintain the electrical grounding of the entire space station? Since when does air ever discharge static? But before we get sucked down into absurdity, let's consider the velocity of Earth through space, and then take into consideration the innumerable amounts of not only meteors, but micrometeors, interstellar space dust, and floating debris, all traveling at comparable speeds, which should all pose a very real and constant threat, not only to the International Space Station, but to all the astronauts said to be on board. In fact, the sheer infinitude of undetectable micrometeors shooting through space, from whichever haphazard impact like bullets, should make every spacewalk a real life-threatening assignment. But every astronaut is always laughing about how much fun their jobs all are. whilst constantly inserting lame attempts to identify with viewers. They even go so far as to hairspraying their female astronauts' hair, making it look like anything but authentic weightlessness. The scenes where they are on harnesses are equally as laughable, as well as when turbulence is encountered on their outfitted zero-G planes, not to mention bubbles being caught on film during their spacewalks. Though there is a trackable image resembling the International Space Station as it is said to move across the sky, the image is strangely prismatic, resembling a hologram, and does not in fact look like an actual orbiting piece of machinery. Clearly, for the reasons already stated, the International Space Station cannot exist the way NASA claims. So investigate the subject for yourself, and ask questions.